Hello, I'm Morris Kochanski, Wilderness Living Skills and Survival Instructor. People might wonder sometimes where I get my information. I don't invent too much of it, very rarely. There is the odd thing. You might have an opportunity to read behind the lines and do some innovation. But there are certain sources that are enjoyable reading, also give you all kinds of ideas about how people got by on very simple terms. Here is a book. It's Our Southern Highlanders by a guy who wrote a classic in the outdoors, camping and woodcraft, Horace Kephart. And this tells you about how the these I think were immigrants from Scotland, how they got by in the Appalachians. Uh, they built their own stills. They grew their own gardens. They tanned their own hides. And they did many things that were very self-sufficient, and there's all kinds of information, useful information can be gleaned from that. Another book that is even more fertile, because there are northern peoples, the Aboriginal peoples of North America, they were in the Stone Age, but the Aboriginal peoples of Siberia and Northern Europe. And this is a book about perhaps maybe 100 different tribes that lived in Siberia, and they had iron, so they had metal woodworking tools. But there are many things that I have learned from this that I was able to incorporate and make my background knowledge on wilderness skills and survival that much more better from this particular book, The Peoples of Siberia, written originally in Russian and translated. Similarly, we have the Finno-urgric peoples. So we've got the residents of Finland and Lapland, some of them. Um, the the usage of northern materials are very similar for North America as they are in Northern Europe. This one I have also picked up a lot of useful stuff, and it's about the life in England in the era when the big plagues passed through, and how people had to get by because sometimes the population was decimated and so on, and how they slept in the castles and on and on. I would say probably a dozen things that I've learned from this book that play a big role in improving the issue of how you make yourself more comfortable sleeping and making mattresses and beds and so on. The China at Work. This is a book that gets into the primitive aspect with the iron as being the basic material for making tools and so on, but it gives you many ideas that are an improvement over our traditional European ideas with regard to how you might blacksmith and how you make forges and certain tools. From the perspective of the Chinese, they often did things upside down and backwards, and in many cases, they improved the situation a great deal. Zhora is the name of what you see on here, the Millstone, and this book really covers in very great detail what my father seemed to know when he came to this part of the country with regard to self-sufficiency and living close to the land. The people, many people of Europe were forest people, and they depended on the forest to supply them with berries and fish and mushrooms and game and so on, and they grew an awful lot. And there was, my father's era, there really were no stores. There were itinerant salesmen. Somebody might come by selling pots. Somebody might come by selling axe heads and scythe blades, things like that, and you built all the rest. So you find that if you're interested in that organic existence before the infernal combustion engine and so on, this is a very fertile source of information. For example, if you were going to build a bucksaw in by carrying the blade and then making the frame when you needed it, you would get some very very sophisticated insights in how they used to do it in their day. The survival arts of the primitive Piutes. Well, the authors use the word survival. It's distorted in a way where survival to me is dealing with life-threatening stresses, and if that stress is allowed to happen too long, let's say a few hours or a few days or a few weeks, you might perish. Survival arts of the primitive Piutes, these were the living arts, you might say. There was no question of surviving. They had to build the rafts and the boats and the snares and make the robes out of rabbit skin. But that wasn't an issue of survival. That was an issue of everyday living. That was an issue that you knew how to do that, you lived comfortably. But at any rate, this was an unusual book that when I encountered it way back 30, 40 years ago, that I was quite taken by it, and it's still one of my favorite books. At any rate, when you go through a pile of 7 books of this nature, it gives you a very broad exposure to doing things in what I call the organic way, directly. You make your own things directly from the environment, from the forest, and you incorporate these things. Well, the books in particular, this Siberian book, might go into how you might gather berries and store them and preserve them, how you might feed animals in that well-off northern place that they had enough to eat in the winter and managed to survive till spring, and so on and so on. But at any rate, I find this particular area the most interesting and the most fertile source of information to enhance survival knowledge in the sense of modern survival.